Thank you, Deputy. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All right, thank you once again. We'll get started without further ado. Mr. Escobar?
Good morning, Your Honor. The defense would call Curtis Reeves.
Wait, there, yeah.
I'm gonna take his water.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Escobar.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Reeves.
Good morning, sir.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
Curtis J. Reeves, Jr.,
Mr. Reeves, how old are you?
79.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your family. You married?
Yes, sir, I am.
And who are you married to?
Vivian Reeves.
Okay, and where did you meet Vivian?
Many years ago, I think at church.
Okay. And you have two children as well?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, and what are their names?
Matthew and Jennifer.
What does Matthew do for a living?
Matthew is with Tampa PD. He's on the bomb squad.
Okay. And your daughter?
She's a vice president at a bank, I believe.
Okay. I want to take you back some time after your graduation. What high school did you attend?
I attended Hillsborough High School.
Is that in Tampa, Florida?
It's in Tampa, yes, sir.
And do you know when you graduated?
1961.
Okay. And after graduating from high school, would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you did?
I went from high school into the Navy for 6 years in the reserves, 2 years active duty.
And there, did you specialize in any particular area of the Navy? In other words, did you graduate from a particular program?
Well, I went to the submarine school in New London, Connecticut, and I was assigned to a submarine, and my specialty was machinist mate.
Okay. After your service there with the military, did you seek employment elsewhere?
Yes, sir. After I got off my active duty, I went to work for General Telephone as a construction lineman.
You were there for, what company was that?
That was General Telephone, GTE.
Okay, and you were there for how long?
About 2 years.
Okay, what happens after that 2-year period? What profession did you pursue?
I applied for a Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office and Tampa PD, filled out all the necessary paperwork. They did backgrounds on me, that sort of stuff.
Okay, and did you get hired?
Yes, sir. Tampa called me first, and that's where I went to work.
In 1966?
October of 1966, yes, sir.
And in pursuing this career as a police officer, did you have to go through some training, some academy training?
Initially, it was, I think, about 320-something hours of, it was called recruit training is what it was called at the time.
And did you serve that class with other members that were also going to be new police officers on the streets of Tampa?
Yes, sir. I believe there was about 30 or 32 of us.
Okay. And you finished that course?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was there a process when you finished that course where members of that group were selected for their achievements while at the academy?
Well, yes, sir. I got what was called at that time a certificate of achievement, which was supposed to be the best all-around student. And I was also the vice president of that class.
Okay. Just so that I don't forget, when your son went to the academy, did he also receive that same achievement?
He received the same achievement. It was called something else, but it was the same award.
And so now in 1966, you're going to be out on the streets of Tampa as a new recruit police officer.
Yes, sir. I was on probation for, I think, 6 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And what department within the Tampa Police Department, what section did you start off with? Patrol?
At that point, it was called Patrol Division, yes, sir.
Okay. And how old were you? I know it's going to be, the math may be somewhat difficult. How old were you when you first started as a patrolman with the Tampa Police Department?
It's a little fuzzy, but I think 23 or 24.
Okay. Still pretty young.
Young man.
Explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happens when you become a police officer patrolling the streets of a community like Tampa. Tell the jury what you learned very quickly as a police officer.
It was quite an eye-opener. You don't realize what's going on in your community, and you don't realize the depth of the criminal element that's in your community until you're basically face to face with them. It's like stepping into a different world.
And so on a daily basis, what kind of contact would you have, for example, with individuals that were injured as a result of violent episodes?
I think one of the biggest surprises that I had was the number of people that were victims of all sorts of different things, but injuries and stuff like that, I wasn't accustomed to seeing that kind of stuff. It was like a new experience and not very pleasant.
Domestic violence cases?
Those were very prevalent. Domestic violence, physical assaults,
Bar fights?
felony assaults, knives, guns. If you can imagine it being used as a weapon, it was.
While you were in patrol, did you have any sort of guidance from individuals that had been police officers, certainly longer than you had? You were just starting. Explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how that worked. What supervisors did you have in an effort to try to learn the profession of being a police officer and serving your community?
Well, I think initially you were assigned with a field training officer. In those days, it was a corporal. And that corporal is walking you through that probationary period, evaluating you and exposing you to as much activity as you can to broaden your range of activities. So essentially, you're assigned mostly at then, it was as a buffer unit, which means you could pretty much go anywhere you wanted to in the zone. So anytime there was something exciting or serious, or then your corporal would take you over there to give you that experience and how it's dealt with. So you kind of getting on the ground floor at a pretty fast pace.
At the academy, were you taught to use tools to protect yourself while you were there, out in the community serving your community?
The training program, which I thought was excellent, and you were given the tools that were on your gun belt. You were given the exposure and experience from the senior officers and the other officers in the squad, and the sergeants would share their experiences with you, and I had some very excellent mentors and the sergeants that I worked for over those years, and it kind of gave me a different perspective on the whole world, on what I was seeing as a new young man.
As a new young police officer, was it scary being out there dealing with those particular episodes?
Well, after I had been there for my probationary period, I was turned loose on my own, and over the next 6 months to a year, I had a couple of incidents that occurred that could have been very hazardous to me if it hadn't worked out the way it did. So I kind of got really interested in being aware of what's going on around you, and I started talking with the other officers, and I hear a lot of this conversation about your environment and the people that are around you. You learn to very quickly be very quickly involved in assessing your environment and the folks that are around you and what's going on. So that's the first thing I learned.
You were in patrol for how long?
About a year and a half, including my probationary period. And then at that point, I was assigned as a selective enforcement unit, which was an undercover operation, mostly addressing high crime areas, crimes in progress, stakeouts, that sort of thing.
So you went from a patrol position to a position, would you say that that was a much more dangerous position as a police officer for the Tampa Police Department?
Yes, sir. We were given some training. Working undercover is a completely different set of circumstances than working as a patrol officer, because with a department as large as ours, not all the officers know who you are or may not be able to recognize your car. So you are not only dealing with dangerous people, but you also have to be well aware of the fact that any officer responding to that call may not know who you are.
Did that position offer you any greater responsibility?
I think it developed. I had an excellent sergeant. I had an excellent squad. You're kind of absorbed into the system, and you are developed by the senior officers. And if training comes available, they try to get you into the training programs, or they try to provide training programs for you so that you can kind of get your feet on the ground and try to keep from becoming a victim and be alert and all the things that you have to do to survive and make it home every afternoon.
That sergeant that you had in the selective enforcement unit, was he a pretty special person to you?
He ended up being the head of the bomb squad at some point. He was a sergeant at that time, and I think he was probably the guy that started the bomb squad. He was a very well-rounded individual, and he would share with you at the drop of a hat, and he was always trying to develop us. By us, I mean the other officers, to make us better law enforcement officers, give us a better understanding of what our role was and how to perform that role.
Was he your mentor?
He would be considered my mentor, yes, sir. He was. I worked for him and around him pretty much the rest of his career. He retired before I did.
Did you get more exposure while you were in this particular unit to training?
I tried to take advantage. Like I said early on, I had a couple of incidences there that were pretty serious. I was getting married around that same time. I felt an obligation to kind of do the very best that I could. So I took as many training programs as I could. I applied for them. Oftentimes, because of my lack of tenure on the department, I was assigned to different programs that enhanced my abilities to perform the job. Yes, sir.
Did those training programs include training programs in the use of force and the recognition of threat assessments?
Yes, sir. Before I went on the department, they had an officer that had been killed briefly before I went on. So the entire training program at the department had shifted into an officer survival offer. At that time, they called it officer safety program. So there was a lot of, no matter what kind of class that you took, it was the officer safety, how to survive your environment, how to be aware of your surroundings was always a part of just about all the programs.
Working in that particular unit, was there a considerable amount of volatility?
It was, you were, many times you were in the middle of an offense. If there was a robbery in progress, our job was to try to get there. If it was a domestic situation that got violent and you heard a patrol unit assign the call and you could get there first, you tried to do that. And being in an undercover capacity, you really were not necessarily recognized as a law enforcement officer. So you were often in a position to where you had to be very careful, very cautious for your own safety.
How many years were you in this selective group?
I was in the Selective Enforcement Unit. At that time, it was called SEU, for about 2 years.
And so where do you go from there?
While I was there, I was assigned to work on apprehending felons that were what we call recidivists. They were multi-felons. And so I had gotten some recognition from the Detective Division, and on a couple of occasions I had been temporarily assigned to the Detective Division.
Let's talk about that for a second before we get into the fugitive issues. While you were in the Selective Enforcement Group, were you at times removed from that group in order to assist detectives?
Yes, sir.
And what were those assignments for at that time?
When I was assigned to the Detective Division, it was because some detective was either tied up on a case or for some reason not present. They needed somebody to keep the caseload moving, so they would send me up there. And I credit that sergeant with that. I think he submitted me for that, and they accepted me.
Your mentor?
My mentor.
You think your mentor was helping you out, trying to get some experience in the Detective Division?
I think so, yes, sir. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I suspect as much. But I was up there for 60 and 90 days. I think I went up about once or twice, and apparently they liked my work.
And so what happens after selective enforcement? You were talking about the fugitive issues that the Tampa Police Department were having. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what problems they were having back then with reference to fugitives and outstanding warrants.
We had a lot of burglaries and robberies, and when we were apprehending people, we were catching the same people over and over again. So the analysts were trying to figure out who these folks were, and if there were warrants out for them, then they would forward that information to me, and then it was myself and a couple of other officers in this organization would be assigned to go try to find them and apprehend them.
Prior to that, the Tampa Police Department did not have a squad specifically targeting fugitives, is that correct?
That's correct.
And at some point in time, that's a role that you assumed?
Yes, sir. That's probably would be how I ended up in the Detective Division, was perhaps the success rate that me and the other guys had.
You had a group of 3, you said?
Yes, sir, ultimately.
And was that your sole responsibility during that period of time, is going out and trying to find fugitives?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was that a particularly dangerous position to have?
Well, most of these folks knew you were coming. They just didn't know when you were going to get there. So many times they were prepared for you whenever you ran across them, or whenever you, I guess you could say, were able to chase them down.
How long were you doing that, Curtis?
That was toward the end of my time on the Selective Enforcement Unit.
Okay, and then where did you go?
Detective Division.
And what segment of the Detective Divisions?
I was assigned to the Homicide Robbery Bureau.
Okay, so let's give us maybe a roundabout year if you can.
That would have been about 19, well, I had 3.5 years on the department, so 1969, late 69, early 70.
Okay. And so now you're assigned to a homicide division that also handles robbery investigations for the Tampa Police Department.
Yes, sir.
Was that a completely new experience for you?
I had had a little tenure in the Detective Division, so I had an idea, but you normally would buddy up with the senior detectives, and pretty much like in patrol, anything that was noteworthy or pretty serious in nature, you would visit that scene and find it and assist in handling it. It would be kind of like getting your feet on the ground and learning, I guess you could say, how to perform all the different tasks that were required of you.
So initially, when you went into the homicide division, you had a shadowing program?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How long did that shadowing program last?
Probably through my whole career, that 5 years or so up there. That's one of the things that we did collectively, is we always helped each other out. The senior detectives helped the new guys, and at some point I ended up with a little bit more tenure, so I shadowed or had other people shadow me. So it's a continual learning process.
During that time, you were in homicide for how many years?
About 5 years.
During your time there with homicide, did you visit scenes where individuals had obviously been killed?
Yes, sir.
And were those scenes where individuals had been killed as a result of gunfire?
Like I indicated earlier, just about any tool you could imagine. I can recollect gunfire, machetes, chainsaws, axes.
Fist? People being
Fist.
beaten to death?
Fist was a common tool that, from the patrol officer all the way through my whole career, fist fights and injuries related to that stuff that's just one of the constants in the society.
While you were in the homicide squad, did you have the occasion to visit the medical examiner's office?
Yes, sir. Anytime that you were assigned to homicide, or if you were assisting in a homicide and they were going to perform an autopsy, your job was to go over, witness the autopsy, get any evidence that was discovered by the medical examiner, and take that back and put it into the property room.
So that was a pretty routine thing, there was a homicide, you were either the lead detective or assisting, you were going to be at the medical examiner's office, speaking to the medical examiner about what was happening to the body?
Yes, sir.
Did you learn quite a bit from the medical examiner concerning injuries that could occur to the human body?
I think it was another eye-opener for me when you can look at somebody or something and see a minor injury, and yet when you get into the autopsy, you see how devastating that injury can be.
Remember who your medical examiner was when you were in homicide?
John Fiegel.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how many conversations you think you had with Mr. Fiegel during those 5 years in homicide.
I would probably say that for one reason or another, at least weekly, or sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. And if I got at one point I got sidetracked on a bunch of high dollar robberies that I was investigating, so for a couple of months I wasn't there. But at least monthly, over that period of time, you were involved. Going to the medical examiner's office was pretty routine.
"5 years in homicide, where do you go from there?"
I had been off work for a surgery, and I was off for about 6 or 8 weeks, I think. And when I came back, the captain still in the detective division, another captain that was working an area called larceny at that time. The detective division was divided into several different areas, and larceny was one of them. They had a large volume of steel thefts from steel companies, and he asked me to come over there and see if I could do something with those cases.
Those high dollar thefts?
Yes, sir.
$1 million type thefts?
Yes, sir.
And so, for how many months did you participate in those investigations?
Those cases probably went on for probably close to a year before we closed them all out, or most of them out. And so whenever those were closed out, I was right about that same time I was promoted.
And what were you promoted to?
I was promoted to sergeant at that point.
When you were in the detective division, was that the equivalent of a corporal position?
They were pretty much the same at that point. They might still be now, but yeah, basically the same pay scale, I think. So in the department, it would be about the same.
And so what year do you think you were promoted to sergeant at TPD?
76, about 76 or 77, early 77.
So now when you're promoted to the sergeant position, you go back to patrol?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now you're back on the streets.
Yes, sir.
What was that like?
Well, you now have a squad of 10 to 12 officers that are working for you, and those 10 or 12 officers are responding to every call in the zone that they're assigned to. And then you have adjacent zone with officers, so you're kind of keeping an eye on the whole operation that your squad and any call that they get. You're trying to make yourself available to do the same thing my sergeant did for me, which is to assist them in their investigation and give them the tools that they needed to successfully complete their job.
Did you have a responsibility as a sergeant to also keep them safe and keep them trained?
I submitted, pretty much like my sergeant did, I submitted as many as I could for whatever training was available. And at about that same time, they came along with an incentive program for the officers to help out financially, and they were courses that would also help them on the job. So I tried to get as many as I could into those schools and any school that the department had. The department had a training program. Every year, every officer got a week's worth of what we called in-service training. So I made sure that they all got into that training and got the benefit of the latest knowledge that was available from the department.
Throughout this period of time, up until the point that you became sergeant, did you also continue your training as a law enforcement officer and taking courses to better yourself?
Yes, sir. I took advantage of anything that was available, and I started college, I think, in about '72, and I went to Hillsborough Community College for 2 years, and then I finished up at the University of Tampa. And I think I finished up about May of 1976, about the same time I think I got promoted, right around in that same area. So I had finished college at the same time that I had, about the same time I got promoted.
Back in those days, it wasn't police officers that were out in the workforce. Most of them did not have college degrees. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. Most of them did not.
You were going to college and working as a law enforcement officer at the same time?
Yes, sir.
And what was your schedule for school?
I was, when I started in '72, I had earned the GI Bill when I was in the military, and they had a law enforcement educational assistance program. So I enrolled in both of those, and if the college was open, I was there.
Okay. By that time, you were married?
Yes, sir.
Did you have kids?
And they were coming along, yes, sir.
And so you were a police officer going to school almost full time and raising a family.
Yes, sir.
And did you graduate from the University of Tampa?
Yes, sir.
And did you graduate magna cum laude?
Yes, sir, I did.
As a sergeant, you had some responsibilities in evaluating the skills of your men. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you did that and why that was required within the force.
Well, one of the things you have to have I think you have to have an evaluation program. That way you can identify the strong points and the weak points of an individual. And the goal behind that is to make him as good an officer as you possibly can, and that's the job of the sergeant. So you help them when they need help, you provide assistance when they need assistance, you give them the tools that they need to be successful, and then you're required to do an evaluation procedure on each officer. So you get to know them very, very well, very close. You spend a lot of time with them on the street, and your job is to be fair and objective when you do an evaluation.
Right around 1976, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what was happening in the police community around the country in reference to additional help in critical situations.
In the mid-'70s, there was a lot of activities that were going on around the country at different locations that would require some kind of special tools or specially trained officers to deal with it. Some of the more metropolitan agencies had established what they referred to as a SWAT team. it was pretty much the talk of the industry during that time period. And I started collecting some of the data that was available to that. I was fortunate in being assigned to research what it would take to start a unit like that. And myself and another sergeant, we worked up a program for how to start a SWAT team and how to equip them and how to get them trained so that they could respond to those high-risk situations.
And so what happened as a result of that research and that suggestion of starting a SWAT team?
The department saw the need, and so they were very receptive to the information, and they gave me and the other sergeant the responsibility to go out and the financial resources to go out and take the schools and to go to the different places to get us qualified to not only perform as SWAT leaders or tactical leaders, but also to learn how to select officers that would have the right knowledge levels to be a part of that team.
That was, you were starting a completely new squad for the Tampa Police Department.
Yes, sir.
Did you travel throughout the country with courses from the FBI to whatever in order to gain this knowledge of what it was going to take?
Yes, sir. We researched through the FBI. The NRA was very big into law enforcement training in those days. They had a tremendous resource base. International Association of Chiefs of Police, military. We checked with the military on what materials were available. We compiled all that data, and then we found schools that were available for us to attend to learn the skills that we thought we would need to make this thing go forward.
And so how long did that process take of starting the first SWAT team for the Tampa Police Department?
Well, I think the first part of the process was getting us trained, and we went to the FBI and the military, and they came to us on occasion, and then we went through the selection process for the officers. It probably took the better part of 6 months to a year to get to that point.
Now, you had some responsibilities not only in teaching or learning yourself all of the skills necessary to operate a SWAT team, but you now also had to teach your men?
Well, we selected officers that were skilled officers already in the selection process. We picked what we think were excellent candidates, and we took that training and we presented it to them, and we made the training available to them when we could and when the finances would allow it. And that was the whole, trying to get everybody, I guess you could say, up to speed on what was required and the knowledge level that was required and that sort of thing.
Did that process also include having psychological examinations for the individuals that were going to be coming into SWAT?
Yes, sir, it did.
And why was that an important factor?
Well, when you go through the selection process, you try to be as selective as you can, because it's going to be a specialty assignment that's definitely geared to be high speed whenever you get it going. You're going to be dealing with the situations that other officers are either not acquainted or not trained for or not equipped to deal with. So you want to make sure you got the best possible candidates, and the last thing that we did after the training was, before anybody was assigned, everybody took a psych test, including me and the other sergeant.
And they had to pass that psychological test in order to be able to be a member of that squad.
Yes, sir.
Now, that squad was geared to respond to critical situations.
Yes, sir.
To give the members of the jury a bit of perspective, were you also working your normal sergeant's role as a patrol officer, sergeant patrol officer, while you were working as now the sergeant also of the SWAT team?
Yes, sir. The way we designed it, and we were trying to get the best I guess you could say the best out of each one of our employees, is that everybody had their own separate assignment. They were assigned to, these officers were picked from all over the department. So they may be working in different areas than you're working in. And our situation was set up so that I was still running a squad and the other sergeant was still running a squad. So our primary responsibility was whatever our primary assignment was. In the event of an exigent circumstance, then we activated and then we took control of the scene.
During that time, did you feel that there was a greater responsibility for you to keep your men safe?
I think that's probably paramount in any supervisor or manager's mind, is that if you have people working with you or for you, you want to keep them as safe as you possibly can. So any training that you could afford them or yourself, or our plan at we called it the tactical response team, was that if somebody went off for training somewhere, their job was to come back and train everybody else on the team. And we had monthly training days where we sharpened our skills and kept ourselves prepared and tuned up for whatever might come our way.
Was that training that was taking place in-house, was it also simulation training?
Yes, sir. We had role play, we had unarmed defense, we had anything that we might encounter on the street as a police officer or as a tactical unit.
And what was the feeling if you failed in that simulation?
Well, I think win or fail in a simulation is designed to learn. So whether you won in that role play or whether you lost, it was the idea of what you learned from that experience, and for those that were watching you during the role play. So it was all positive from the standpoint of advancing your knowledge on things that you should know about.
Who developed the standard operating procedures and policies for that unit?
Mostly myself and the other sergeant. And at one point, I think they appointed an administrative lieutenant. I think he and I developed most of everything, and the lieutenant just came on as an administrative position.
You had you contacted other SWAT divisions within the country to find out what their blueprint was, what their formula was for operating safely?
Yes, sir. That was part of the initial planning, is that we went to anybody that had a unit, anybody that was thinking about a unit like that, and we went to the military to see how they selected their special teams, and that was kind of the format that we used to establish our unit.
In 1980, you are promoted to lieutenant?
Yes, sir. I think so.
And so tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury now what happens. You're now promoted to a lieutenant. How does your role, how does your experience change within the Tampa Police Department?
Well, your primary assignment now as a lieutenant, at that time, you could have anywhere from 4 to 6 squads working for you. So that could be 10 or 12-man squads. So that could be 40, 50 people. You had 4 or 5 sergeants that would work for you, and you were responsible for providing training for those guys and assisting the sergeants as they provide training to their officers, and to make sure that if you have what we would refer to as a very unusual or a hot call, your job as a lieutenant was to go there, assist the sergeant, and assist the officers as best you could.
So even during that time, you weren't an administrator up in some office. You were still out in the street assisting those squads.
Yes, sir. I guess if I got in trouble more for being on the street than anywhere else. It was an administrative position, and I tried to turn it into an operational position. And it worked, because after that, everybody else started doing it too.
While you were a lieutenant now, overseeing that many squads, who was in charge of the SWAT team?
Well, again, you had a primary responsibility. If I was a lieutenant and anybody else on the team got promoted to any other position anywhere on the department, it didn't change their status on the team. You didn't want to lose the experience or the training that you had in those individuals. So I and myself and the other sergeant, when we set it up, we in the department agreed that we would try to keep that expertise together as long as we could.
1984, you're promoted to captain.
Yes, sir.
Let's tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about that.
Well, as a captain, it depends on your assignment as to how many folks you have working for you. If you're in one of the patrol districts, or you may have that whole district and that whole shift working for you, which could be an awful lot of officers, and the selective enforcement unit was still part of operations, so the patrol division, so you could have those working for you. If you were in the detective division, then you would have as a captain, which I was in just about all of the operational areas of the department. If you were in the detective division, depending upon the assignment that you had, as a captain, when I was in the homicide department, I would have probably 9 to 12 detectives working for me, and if I was in one of the other general investigations, or I think they called it larceny at the time, you may have 20 detectives working for you. If I was in vice control at that time, you may have 60 or 80 detectives working for you.
In 1986, you were captain of the homicide squad, is that correct?
I think about that, yes, sir. I was in the detective division for, I really don't recall, a year or two. I was in patrol division. I think at that time the city was divided in half. I was in District 1 as a commander, I was in District 2 as a commander, I was in the detective division, and ultimately, right toward the end of my career, I was in vice control.
As the captain or the commander, your responsibilities for the safety of your men increased that much more?
I took a personal interest in it, so I guess I've tried to find what was available, what schools were available. I tried to find either managers or supervisors or officers that wanted that type of education or training, and at the same time, we still had the week-long in-service training class for everybody. And back when I was a detective, I had gotten involved in the educational process, so I was involved in training at the academy all through those years, and through those years we developed quite a few programs. I said we at the academy, everything there is teamwork at the department, so there's a team that does everything, whether it's SEU detectives or whoever. So we developed officer survival programs and general investigations programs. Those are all training programs. And as I instructed in some of those things, I tried to work as many officers that worked for me into them as I could.
May I approach you on?
You may.
Mr. Reeves, I'm going to show you what's been marked as composite exhibit ZZ, and I'd like you to take a look at that composite and tell me if you recognize that composite.
Yes, sir, I do.
And what does that composite consist of?
This is going back to when I graduated from submarine school, when I was qualified in submarines all the way through my retirement. This is schools. This is probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the schools that I attended. And I say they're not all here because I know that we've looked at them. They're not all there. Some were displaced, and But the vast majority of the schools and the training programs that I was personally involved in.
Those particular certificates would be kept by the department, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And as you reviewed them, not all of your certificates, your training courses that you took are included in that packet, is that correct?
No, sir. Yes, sir, that's correct. I think we misplaced some. We moved from our house that we were in for a very long time. I think we lost a few of them, and when we tried to get them from the department, they didn't have them.
Okay. Your Honor, we would move Exhibit ZZ into evidence. I'm not going to go through them. It's going to be in evidence, and so the jury can see them.
Yeah. Admitted as defense 12?
12, may I approach the floor?
Yes.
Madam Clerk? Curtis, I'm not going to go through all of those. Those are admitted. Jury can read them for themselves. Now, during your time there with the Tampa Police Department between the 70s and the 80s, did you become a firearms instructor?
Yes, sir, I did.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about that.
Well, along with developing the tactical unit, we needed people that were qualified in firearms. So those were included in the schools that myself and the other sergeant were assigned to. We went to some of the counter sniper schools that the military put on. We went to schools that were sponsored by the Secret Service and the FBI, and all those folks gave us the qualifications to apply to the NRA and become police firearms instructors. So I went a little step further, and you could get certified in pistol, rifle, shotgun, and home safety. So I picked up all those certifications, and you also become a police firearms instructor, which is one of those things you have to update periodically. So you either had to attend a school or put on a school to keep your qualifications active. And with the FBI and the military, we went to long-range shooting schools, long gun use, counter sniper work, that sort of thing there. So that's how that came about.
Okay. And so you were not only a firearms instructor, but you were also a coordinator of the firearms instructors, is that correct?
Well, at that time, we had, because of in-service training and other academies, that the auxiliary academies, and we were also training officers from other jurisdictions that came to our academy. We had a pretty robust firearms training program, and I coordinated that for a number of years, and I think we had about 20 or so instructors. Myself and the staff from the academy would pretty much establish a training program for firearms, and then it was my job to train the instructors and make sure the program was effectively applied.
After 27 years as a law enforcement officer at TPD, did you retire?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Did you then accept a position as head of security with Bush Entertainment?
Yes, sir, I did.
Let's talk a little bit about that. It's a completely different area from police work.
Yes, sir, it is.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you had to do now in order to get trained on being head of security for such a large corporation.
It's considerably different than being in law enforcement, and the fact that you do not have the powers of arrest. You are basically coordinating security officers to perform tasks to protect the company's resources and to train and make the guest experience at Busch Garden as good as it can be. So your mission is completely different, and they had classes that were at that time optional. I felt like they were probably mandatory because it was a change of pace for me. So I availed myself as many training programs as I could. I also inherited a very knowledgeable staff of managers, and they were, as far as knowing the mechanics of how to run a theme park and how to run a security department, they were excellent in that perspective. They just needed they had not had the advantage of training schools before, so I tried to encourage my managers to take advantage of the schools that were available for them, because the mission is different. You don't realize it when you're a law enforcement officer. You kind of slide into the mindset of arrest powers and the power to conduct investigations. So when you go into something like this here, where you do not have those powers, it's almost like like a weight is lifted off your shoulders, because you don't want that responsibility. You're looking for you want to be invisible in your society from the standpoint of being a law enforcement officer. And you don't understand, I didn't understand, the weight that you carry when you have those arrest powers. So it was a pleasant surprise for me and my family when that was ended.
That was a very good job. Director of Security for Busch Gardens, correct?
It was great.
That particular job at the time that you first started did not employ law enforcement officers there at the amusement park, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so what did you do when you came into Busch Gardens with reference to that issue?
The Gardens had a security force of somewhere between 85 and 100 and something security officers. And the turnover rate was pretty high, so it was difficult keeping them trained. So one of the things that you try to do is you try to take a look at what's required of each officer and then provide the training for them so that they can perform those tasks. You find that oftentimes things kind of will occasionally get out of hand. The training method that we used was that if somebody came across an issue, any employee, not just a security employee, any employee that came across an issue, their task was to immediately bring that to the attention of a manager and get a manager involved in it. Sometimes they got beyond the manager level, and then we would have to involve security, and sometimes it got to the point where we needed law enforcement. And when we call them, it was oftentimes a little bit of a delay in their response time, which was they were in the middle of a theme park. Sometimes we'd have 30,000, 40,000 people, and you didn't have the benefit of waiting. So I included a staff. I budgeted for law enforcement, and we tried to keep law enforcement on property so that they could respond to those incidents.
Corporate's desire there at Busch Gardens was for the customer to enjoy the amusement experience. How important was that in your functions as the head of security for Busch Entertainment?
As a head of security, you're responsible for the company resources. You're responsible for, if there is an issue, you want to remove it from the view of the guest. So you have to train your employees. The idea is they won't come back if they don't have a good experience. So the objective there is to make their experience as pleasant as possible. So your job, that was what security did. You were present if they had an issue. If they didn't have an issue, we tried to be invisible. We didn't need to be there. We didn't need to get involved. But that's the purpose was. This is a corporation that makes money off a guest experience, and that's what your responsibility is.
And would you, as head of security for Busch Gardens, at times be heavily involved in those instances where patrons were maybe a bit unruly?
Yes, sir. That would, if it was out of control, we would try to keep from involving law enforcement if we could. And I was probably the last one that would get a call, or if I heard it on the radio, then I would respond. And this goes all the way back to law enforcement experience. No matter what you're encountering, your objective is to de-escalate it. You want to get things down to a manageable level, and most times you can. And that's what your objective is. And if you can offer appeasement to whatever the situation might arise, and if necessary, then you would notify law enforcement or eject them from the property.
At the time that you were head of security for Busch Entertainment, was there a beer garden?
Yes, sir, there was.
Explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the beer garden was at Busch Entertainment.
The beer garden, they were Budweiser brewed a variety of different beers, and they wanted the guests to have the opportunity to sample them, so they had beer kiosks with free beer, and it was a very popular gathering place on the property. And as you can imagine, it was also a popular place for issues to arise.
Curtis, let me ask you a question. Did you ever find the need while you were a law enforcement officer at TPD to have to use your weapon, fire your weapon,
No, sir.
in the line of duty?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you ever find the need, Curtis, when you were working for 12 years for Bush Entertainment with 30,000 people visiting that amusement park, to ever have to pull your weapon and use your weapon?
No, sir, I did not.
You enjoyed your time as head of security for Busch Gardens?
It was like I said, a change of pace, and it was a much easier job than I had come from.
Your reasons for leaving the Tampa Police Department, what were those reasons? Please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
I had cancer in 1988, so I was not insurable for about 5 years. So I had had some related health issues, and I had spent 27 years there doing that stuff. It was a very dynamic job. You don't realize the dynamics of it until you're not there anymore. So I was looking around. My wife and I kind of had a retirement plan in mind, and I had been there for 27. I think I was 51 years old, and I had heard about a job opportunity, and I applied for it.
And you were there at Busch Entertainment for how many years?
I think about 11, almost 12.
And so why did you leave Busch Entertainment?
As a manager, you needed to check on your people periodically, and I was having issues that didn't give me the walking, standing on my feet all day long was becoming quite a chore. So I had been through a lot of physical therapy and different strategies to make it better, and it wasn't getting any better. So my wife and I were kind of on track for retirement, and we had built a new house in a new location, and it just kind of coincided with the medical issues. In the latter part of 2004, I had been doing a lot of physical therapy 3 days a week for months and months, and the new house was there. It was just a good time to let it go.
And so now, for the next 8 years, you were in retirement.
Yes, sir.
May I approach?
You may.
Curtis, I'm going to show you what's been entered in exhibit as, looks like it's number 23, and ask you to take a look at that exhibit. Would you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that exhibit is?
This is a concealed weapons or a firearms license for the state of Florida.
And was that your concealed weapons license for the state of Florida?
Yes, sir, it is.
And was that particular concealed weapons permit active on January the 13th of 2014?
Yes, sir, it was. It looks like it expired in 2017.
May I approach you?
You may.
Curtis, I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 27 that's been introduced into evidence as a state's exhibit. Would you please tell me what that exhibit is?
Okay, this is my ID card, my retired ID card from the City of Tampa Police Department, showing that I retired from the Tampa Police Department on September 30th, 1993.
Did you have both of those items on your person on January the 13th of 2014?
Yes, sir, I did.
May I approach you?
You may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 25 that's been introduced into evidence. I'm going to ask you to take a look at that particular card, and please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that card entails.
This is a firearms proficiency verification card from the state of Florida. This is a requirement for it's called HR 218, which is a federal firearms program that encourages retired law enforcement officers to be armed. It's a proficiency test that you have to perform annually to maintain that proficiency. And it says on the front that I'm qualified with both a pistol and a revolver. The difference is a pistol is normally a semi-auto, and a revolver has a cylinder in it. So those are the two things. And you can qualify with any caliber of this weapon, and you're qualified with any semi-automatic or revolver.
And was that particular certificate or that particular permit valid on January the 13th of 2014?
Yes, sir, it was.
And Curtis, did you have this in your possession as well on January the 13th of 2014?
Yes, sir, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach? Curtis, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 29, and ask you if you recognize that particular exhibit.
Yes, sir, I do.
And what is that exhibit?
This is a badge case that those other credentials were in, along with my retirement badge.
And what does that retirement badge say?
It says C.J. Reeves, Captain, City of Tampa, Florida Police Department, retired.
Curtis, you heard Dr. Foley describe some of your ailments that were visible on the x-rays here yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
And were those the ailments that you had on January the 13th of 2014?
I guess I didn't realize they were that serious, but yes, sir, it is.
And were you having pain as a result of those ailments?
I did have, yes, sir, my legs, my back, primarily, shoulders. It was bearable. I tried to stay as active as I could, as long as I could. So I tried to take every opportunity to exercise, because I saw so many people that had these issues and didn't. So yes, I had those. I was also prescribed an anti-inflammatory, so I took those to to help out whenever it got bad.
That cane that you walked up today with, you weren't using a cane back in January of 2014, were you?
No, sir.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury when you first started using that cane that you walked up?
Objection, relevance.
I think it's very relevant.
Approach.
Curtis, to get back to my previous questions, back in January of 2013, you weren't using that cane, correct?
No, sir, I wasn't.
And would you, excuse me, 2014, would you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury when you first started using that cane?
Probably in the latter part of 2014, and
When did you start using that cane?
probably a year or two ago. I mean, on a fairly regular basis.
Okay.
Off and on, I had some nerve issues that would make me.
Objection, Your Honor, this is going beyond what we discussed at the bench.
It's the reason, Your Honor.
Oh, well.
And it was not constant. It was kind of off and on. So if I was having trouble keeping my balance or walk in a straight line, I would use a cane.
Let me ask you a question. Did you just recently also have surgery on your feet?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And have you been using, at least out in public, the cane a bit more because of that surgery?
Yes, sir.
When you're at home, do you use the cane everywhere you go at home?
Not always. I have a walking stick. Sometimes I'll use that, and sometimes if I'm not having any issues, I'm really not. No, not all the time. If I'm having an issue, yeah, I don't want to fall down, so
Okay.
I'll use it.
And so are you telling the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that some days are good and some days are not too good?
Yes, sir.
Objection, relevance.
Okay. Let's go over some of the things that that Dr. Foley talked about. You got herniated discs, is that correct?
In my back, yes, sir. I think starts at the top and goes all the way down to my lower back.
And did you have those herniated discs on January the 13th of 2014?
Yes, sir, I didn't. Yes, sir.
Did you have arthritis and experiencing arthritis throughout your body?
I started really noticing it probably about the time I retired from Bush, about 2004, 2005, when we moved. That's when I started really having some serious coordination problems, I guess you could say. Strength problems.
Did those injuries that you were experiencing, did they cause you pain?
Yes, sir, they did.
And so what would you do as a result of that pain?
Well, you kind of learn how to take care of yourself. If you're going to do something you know it's going to be painful, you either take a leave before you do it, or after you finish it, or you don't complete the whole task. You work until you start feeling the pain, and then you stop and then take it up again the next day. So you just kind of learn how to manage it, whether it's your back, your hands, your arms, whatever.
Curtis, excuse me, Mr. Reeves, did you continue to want to do things despite your pain?
Objection, relevance.
Yes, sir, I did. I think that was, I didn't want to get into a position where I didn't have a range of motion or mobility. So I took some of the things that would be normally, that you would normally think would be something that you would do around your house, and taking out the garbage, mowing the yard, trimming the shrubbery. I continued to do that as long as I could.
And do you continue to do those things even as we sit here today in the year 2022?
Not nearly as frequently, but yes, sir, I still do.
And why is it that despite pain, you still do it in the year 2022?
Objection, relevance.
It doesn't keep you young, but it keeps you mobile. I think it keeps your limbs mobile, and it keeps you moving around, and you don't have, I see so many people that I know that don't do that, and my wife and I both try to be active, and because I guess we're trying to fight the old age, but it isn't working.
Let's talk about some of the things that you continue to do, Curtis. Mr. Reeves. My apologies, Your Honor. Take out the garbage.
Yes, sir.
Still do that.
Yes, sir.
Mow the yard.
Yes, sir.
Still do that.
Yes, sir.
Trim the hedges.
Yes, sir.
Still do that.
Yes, sir.
Wash the house.
Once every 7 years or so. Yes, sir.
Pressure wash.
Yes, sir.
Cut limbs in your yard.
Have a lot of oak trees. When the wind blows them out, I pick them up and dispose of them.
And cut them.
Yes, sir. If they're too big to burn, I'll cut them and make them smaller.
When you're doing all of those chores, are you in pain?
Most of the time.
Do you feel bad every day? Do you have pain every day?
If I'm not careful, yes, sir.
Sometimes you have no pain at all.
Sometimes it's not as noticeable. Let's put it that way. You kind of.
Your Honor, I would object to relevancy for 2014.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain.
Okay. Let's talk about 2013, some of the things that you had difficulties doing. You were on the floor. Difficulties getting up off the floor?
My granddaughter was with us for a while. I tried not to get on the floor because you had to find something to pull up on to get up off the floor. So yes, that was a problem.
Opening a jar of peanut butter.
I lost the strength in my hands a few years ago.
Does that mean that you weren't going to the range anymore to shoot?
No, sir. It's. I guess I could explain it like that was an opportunity to get together with my friends and do things that we've always done. So you're willing to put up with the aggravation and the pain to go and have a good day at the range and have lunch with your pals.
I'm going to direct your attention to January the 13th of 2014, Mr. Reeves.
Yes, sir.
What did you decide to do that day, or that midday, here in Pasco County?
My wife and I had, or maybe my son and I had decided that we wanted to see a movie that was showing, and I spoke with my wife, and she said she'd like to go too. So we researched where it was on at and what time it started.
And what movie was that?
I'm sorry?
What movie was that?
That was a Lone Survivor.
Okay. And so about what time do you think you got to the theater that day?
I think right around 1 o'clock.
And what did you do as you went into the theater?
We were a little early for the show, and our son was going to meet us, and we didn't know exactly when he was coming, so we kind of stood around the lobby for a while when we first got there, waiting for him to get there.
Okay.
Mr. Escobar,
Yes.
I think it would be appropriate to take a short recess before we go any further.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
We've been going about an hour and a half, so, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a 10-minute recess. Please remember my instructions during the break, and we'll see you in a few.
All right, we're in the recess for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Be seated. Tina, did you want to tell them?
He did.
Oh,
just
okay.
said yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Judge, before the jury comes in, can we do that housekeeping from yesterday?
I was going to mention that, yeah.
That is Exhibit BD1, you would move this into evidence.
Just look at
Yeah,
the stats.
that was from yesterday, Mr. Knox's
Yes.
stuff.
We didn't introduce the thumb drive, Scott. That was just demonstrative, the thumb drive. That's why we put the pictures in.
Pictures in front.
Yeah.
Right. So that'll actually be 13? Defense 13, okay. Any objection, Mr. Rosenwasser? All right, it'll be admitted as defense 13. Thank you. Okay.
Jurors in the courtroom, Your Honor.
All righty.
You may be seated. All jurors are present and counted.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, were you able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Escobar.
Mr. Reeves, some housekeeping matters that my colleagues here reminded me. I'm going to,
You may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit Composite AAA, and have you please take a look at that.
Yes, sir.
You recognize that?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what are those?
Those are certificates of training and professional certifications from my time at Busch Gardens.
And we would move AAA into evidence. I've showed
Same
it.
reading as previously made objections.
Okay, same ruling. They'll be admitted as 14.
Mr. Reeves, I'm not going to ask you any questions about that. The jury will have the ability to look at those for themselves. Getting back now to the theater, I believe we left off where you had been waiting a bit in the lobby for Matt, you and Mrs. Reeves, is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And then you indicated that you proceeded to go into the theater after buying some popcorn and a drink, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so, when you went into the theater, where did you sit?
We sat on the very last row, almost in the middle of the theater. There's a wall that at the very back of the theater, there's a wall. We were right up against that wall.
Was it still pretty early on, meaning that the previews
sir.
were not playing? You were just there for a period of time?
The lights were up. There may have been something on the screen. We weren't paying much attention. It was probably housekeeping stuff like the concession stand, that sort of stuff.
Okay. And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury whether Mr. and Mrs. Olson were likewise seated in front of you and your wife?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How long of time passed during that period of time before the previews started?
I'm gonna guess 10 minutes maybe, or I don't know exactly, 10 or 15 minutes, because we got there rather early.
Okay. And during those 10 or 15 minutes, did you notice whether Mr. Olson was using his phone?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And did you, during that time, at any point in time, interrupt his using of the phone and tell him to stop using the phone or anything like that?
Not until after the preview started.
Okay. And so for those 10 or 15 minutes, you and Vivian sat there, discussed whatever you all were discussing, is that correct?
I had texted my son and told him where we were sitting so he could find us, and other than that, just talking, I guess.
Okay. At some point in time, does an announcement come on?
I think right about the end of the advertisement says the turn off your cell phone graphic, I guess you could say, and then they announced to turn off your cell phones, if I remember correctly.
And did the previews then start?
Yes, sir, they did.
Okay. And so the previews start, the announcement has already come on, and were you looking at the previews?
Yes, sir,
And was your wife, Mrs. Reeves, also looking at the previews?
as far as I know.
And why were you looking at the previews?
Well, that's kind of how we decide what shows we're going to see. We kind of look at the trailers
To see what's coming?
to see what's coming, and then we'll decide whether or not we want to come.
At some point in time while you were viewing those previews, did you notice a light shining in the theater?
Yes, sir, I did. I noticed off to my right, over who turned out to be Mr. Olson's left shoulder, was a cell phone.
And was that light shining on you?
It was shining in my face. Yeah, I tried to adjust my seat position, but it was still shining in my face.
What did you do at that point?
I waited for a while after they started, because I don't know how long. I waited to see if he would put it away, if he was interested in what was on the screen or not. And it never went away.
And so what did you do, realizing that it was not going to be turned off as the announcement had requested of all patrons?
Let's keep our cell phones off, please.
When I realized that it wasn't going to go off and that it was still shining in my face, I leaned over and requested that he turn his phone off. I said, "Would you mind turning your phone off, sir?"
Okay. And so when you're saying leaned over, you were seated in your seat.
Yes, sir.
And tell the ladies and gentlemen what you mean by leaning over.
Well, when you're in the theater like that, I don't know how far apart we were, but I wasn't communicating with anybody but this gentleman. So I would lean over to get a little bit closer to him so that I didn't have to yell at him, and I just asked him if he'd put his phone away.
Okay. At that point in time, were the previews playing?
Yes, sir.
Were the previews loud?
Loud, and the lights had gone down. It was darker, but that's what I remember.
And so what response did you get from Mr. Olson when you leaned forward to tell him, that was quietly, you said?
Yes, sir.
To please turn his phone off?
It was a fuck off, get the fuck out of my face was the response that I got back. He was facing away from me, but he was saying it loud enough to where I heard it.
And so what did you do at that point?
I sat back in my chair and still thinking that he might put it away.
Did you overhear some additional conversations after that statement was made to you?
I heard him talking because he was talking loudly, and I think he was talking to his wife or maybe to the theater in general, because it was loud, and I perceived that his wife had reached over with one of her arms, and my thought was that she was probably trying to get him to quiet down.
Okay. And so what are you doing at this point in time? Are you just seated back?
Yes, sir. I waited to see if if he was going to turn his phone off.
Did you attempt to try to hear what was being discussed between Mr. Olson and his wife?
No, sir. I don't think I did. It was loud. I could hear him talking. I never heard her say anything, and I really just picked up a word every now and then.
Okay. So, how long do you think you waited before you decided to leave the theater?
I think somewhere between right around 3/4 of a minute, I guess, half a minute, 3/4 of a minute. And it was still prominently displayed and still shining in my eyes.
Okay. And so what did you decide to do at that point?
Well, I decided that if I couldn't get him to turn it off, that it was between him and the theater. They're the ones that said you can't use one. It wasn't between him and I. So, I again, being not necessarily gentle, but I just leaned over and I said, "You leave me no alternative other than to notify the management."
And how did he respond to that?
He didn't give a fuck what I did. And that was pretty loud, and he didn't turn around either. He was still facing away from me.
And so what did you do at this point?
Well, he was saying some other things that I could pick up a word every now and again. He was being kind of loud and stuff like that, but I didn't pick up any words. So I had a bag of popcorn in my hand. I handed it to my wife, and I started down the aisle towards the end aisle.
Mr. Reeves, why at that point in time didn't you just move your seats?
Well, the guy was just being mouthy. I mean, I've had a career of dealing with people like that. It didn't present a threat to me. I probably didn't think about how it affected my wife, but to me, I saw no threat to it at all.
And so you get up to do what?
I got up to go to down the aisle to the end to go to the manager's office.
Okay, and it was still dark in the theater?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as you were leaving the theater, did you speak to any of the patrons where you were trying to get by?
Well, yeah, there's not a lot of space in there, and I didn't want to bump this guy's chair, so yeah, I used I used the wall behind me or behind my wife to kind of steady me as I walked down the aisle, so I didn't bump into his chair or step on anybody else's feet.
Okay. And you proceeded out?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And where did you go?
I went down the stairs and I went out front, and there was a young man at the where they take the tickets, and I asked him if there was a manager nearby, and he pointed me towards the guy that was sitting in the kiosk out front.
Okay. And so when you get to the individual that was at the kiosk out front, was there somebody else that was speaking to that manager at the time?
Yes, there was a lady standing right around the counter from me she would have been on my right, and she was conversing with the manager and back and forth at that time.
Did you interrupt them at all during that process?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay. Did you wait for your turn to speak to the manager?
Yes, sir, I waited until he acknowledged me.
And can you tell the ladies and the jury exactly what you told the manager at that moment?
I told him that I said I kind of apologized to him and said I feel kind of strange doing this, but I'm a guy complaining on another guy. I said, but I've got a guy sitting in front of me that is using his cell phone, and I asked him politely to put his cell phone away, and I said he used a lot of profanity, and I said I don't feel comfortable talking to this guy again. Could you help me out?
Okay. And what did he say?
He responded that he would take care of it.
Okay.
That
So where did you go then?
I went back in the theater.
And did you go back into your role?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you try to get back to your seat in a polite and courteous way?
Yeah, going in and out. I told people. Most people don't go out right after the show starts. It's kind of awkward, so I kind of felt awkward leaving at that particular point. But I said things like, "Sorry, I have to get by. Excuse me," that sort of thing. Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you mad?
No, sir.
When you got up off your seat to go tell the manager, were you mad?
No, sir.
You heard Mrs. Roy come and testify before this jury. When you were leaving the theater, were you grumpy?
No, sir.
Did you tell the manager where you were seated?
Yes, sir, I did.
As you were walking back to your seat, or did you get back to your seat?
I got back to my seat, and then I took the popcorn bag from my wife and sat down and got it from her. One or the other, I got it from her.
Okay, and during that time period, did you hear Mr. Olson making any statements?
I heard him. He wasn't talking to me. I don't know who he was talking to. He was talking, again, kind of loud. And he was saying something about the manager and the theater. I didn't pick up every word. I was standing up, and it was something about the theater and the manager, and he had been kind of staring in my direction, and I don't know. He wasn't talking to me, but he was speaking out loud.
He was staring at your directions as you were walking?
As I came back in, yes, sir. He kind of looked in my direction.
Okay. And was he accusing you of turning him into the manager?
I kind of interpreted it as that, but I didn't hear those exact words. It was, I think he was trying to relay that he was not happy.
Okay. And then what did you do at this point?
I tried to, I think the word is diffuse the situation, so I made a comment to him about if I had known that you had put your phone away, I wouldn't have involved the manager.
Okay. Now, Mr. Reeves, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happens at this very moment.
As I sit down, he's still talking loudly, and he's facing away from me. I can pick up a word every now and then, but I don't know what he's actually saying. And a movement caught me off on the right side of my eye, and I turned my head to look at him, and almost immediately he had turned and was on his feet, and I had something between me and the theater screen that I saw just a flash of a reflection off of. And then everything went kind of fuzzy.
Did you believe at that point that you had been hit?
Yes, sir, I did.
And where do you think that you were hit at that moment?
I think I was hit on my glasses on the top left side. That was where I felt the impact, I think. And I wasn't sure how it had happened because I didn't think he was that close to me. So it had to be something else.
That's what you thought?
Yes, sir.
This blur that you saw, were you able to describe it?
It was like a flash. It was between me and the screen. It was very close to me. It just didn't compute. I had no idea what it was at that time.
At that moment, did it appear that he was coming into your space?
At that point, I noticed that he was standing up. He was yelling a lot of profanities. There was threats and who the fuck do you think you are? I was texting my fucking daughter. The F word seemed to be his primary vocabulary at that point. Who the fuck do you think you are? I'm going to fuck you up or something. Now that's not exact, because I'm picking up bits and pieces because this guy is very volatile and active. He's trying to come over the seats.
Did you try initially to get up?
I was in a seated position, and when I first detected the profanity and stuff, he was trying to come over the seat. He was trying to. I felt like he was trying to either that or get to me, one or the other. It appeared to me that I've never been in that kind of a position before, And I realized immediately, and I don't know how, whether he got onto us, I don't know what happened, but when he stood up, I'm sitting down in a completely defenseless position. I'm looking up at this guy, and he looked like a monster standing there. He was mad. He exhibited explosive behavior, both verbally and physically. And I had seen his wife, who had tried to control him when he jumped up, and she had a hold of his arm, and he had turned around. At that point, I was focused on him.
Why at that point were you just focused on him?
He was a threat. He was a threat that was very close to me. And the closer a threat is to you, the less time you have to react to anything that happens. I had tried to get further away from my wife because he was after me, and I had leaned as far as I could to my left, and I had kind of straightened my right leg out towards where my wife was sitting, and I didn't want to again hit his chair. He just appeared to me like he was out of control. That it was like his wife was kind of hanging onto his arm or his shoulder. She was in the peripheral. I saw him. He was reaching for me or trying to come over the seat again. It was at that point I couldn't get up. I was trapped. I couldn't go left or right, and even beyond being seated in front of this guy that's standing up in front of me, I'm leaning to the side, completely defenseless. I could do nothing to defend myself.
At some point, do you decide to pull your weapon?
At some point after he's reached, either trying to come over the seat or tried to hit me, at some point I made a decision that I had no alternative. The guy's, in my opinion, he's completely out of control. He's not settling down, and his wife is trying to hold him back, or appear to be trying to hold him back, or control him. I guess that would be the right word. And I've never been encountered by somebody exhibiting that uncontrolled anger or rage, and all of the perceptors that you could imagine, whether it's verbal, physical, expression. At some point at that time, I had no other choice, and I reached for my pistol.
Now, after reaching from your pistol, do you see some hands coming in your direction?
I'm pretty much zeroed in on him, and I know I made some comments at some point in there as this was happening. It was very quick, in my mind, it was, the event itself was very fast, and I didn't think I had enough time to respond. And at that point, I was concerned that he was so much above me and so full of rage, I guess you could say, that he was going to strike me with all the strength that he had or he could put together. I figured that this was the end of the line for me. I thought that at the very least I'd be seriously injured, if not killed.
Curtis, did you feel at that point in time that you had the capabilities to ward him off with your bare hands?
I was pretty sure I couldn't do that. That was never a question. In the position that I was in, there's no way I could have done that.
You fired a shot from your pistol?
One shot.
What happens after you fire that shot?
As soon as he turns away, then he's no longer a threat. So I lay down the pistol, and then I try to determine how bad I'm hurt. And then I realized that my glasses, the reason that everything is blurry is because my glasses were kind of sideways. I'm gonna call it askew. This left piece here was down on my cheek, and my glasses were kind of, I guess you could call it askew. that's when I realized that the reason everything was so blurry was because my glasses had been knocked off.
Well, were they knocked off or were they askew?
Askew.
Okay. Were those the glasses you were wearing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. May I see them?
Yes, sir.
When I approach?
You may.
It's okay if I look at them as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Curtis, these are the glasses that you had?
Yes, sir.
And don't be insulted. These are old men glasses that can switch and turn in every direction known to man. I'm not
Yeah.
going to break them,
Yes, sir.
right? I've done this before, right?
Yes, sir.
And these are the glasses that you were wearing that day.
Yes, sir, it is.
Curtis, did you want to shoot Chad Olson?
I didn't want to shoot anybody. I came to the theater with my family to enjoy a movie, not to be attacked by some guy that's out of control.
The most dangerous of individuals are what? Individuals that are out of control.
Absolutely, anybody that's not controllable, their rage is so powerful, their thought patterns, in my opinion, are only towards whatever they feel anger towards. They're not influenced by the surrounding area.
Had you ever in your entire life seen anybody act the way Mr. Olson acted in a movie theater? Ever seen anybody? Did you ever experience anything like that?
I've never experienced anything like that inside of a theater or anywhere else. That was a complete surprise. It was a shock that somebody would actually do that. And I guess the thing that I couldn't understand, and all this passed through my mind right away, is why is somebody acting like that over such a trivial thing? I still haven't figured that out.
Why were you trying to create distance at some point in time in this situation?
Well, any time that you're involved in any kind of and I'm going back to training and exposure and experience for years, any time that you're going to be involved in something like that, the first thing that you want to do is get away from the individual. You want to, that would diffuse it. If you could get away from them, then whatever is going to happen may not happen. If you can't, then you're like in my case, I had nowhere to go and no way to get there.
How quickly did all this happen?
In my mind, it was the blink of an eye from the time I sat down until it was over.
Once you fired the shot, did you say, "Throw popcorn at me, will you"?
I had no knowledge at all about that popcorn. It must stay, but the deputies asked me that, I think. I never saw the popcorn until I saw it on the floor. I had no idea what had happened to the popcorn.
Did you shoot Mr. Olson because of popcorn?
I shot Mr. Olson because I thought he was going to seriously injure me or potentially kill me.
May I approach? Mr. Reeves, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 55, and I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 51, and ask you if you recognize those exhibits.
Yes, sir. These are the photographs that the ID tech from the sheriff's office took, I think, in the theater.
Did you get an opportunity to see yourself in a mirror while you were seated in the front seat of a patrol cruiser?
Yes, sir. The detectives put me in the passenger when they were conducting the interview, and I asked them if I could use their little mirror.
And why did you ask them if you could use their mirror?
After I had, my eye was still bothering me, and I had already.
Which eye was that?
Sir?
Which eye was that?
Left eye.
Okay.
Yes, sir. My eye was still bothering me, and I wanted to see if I could see anything in it.
Okay. And does those pictures fairly and accurately depict what you saw in the mirror?
Yes, sir, it does. Yes, sir.
Okay. And what do you see on the left eye, the corner of your left eye, in the state's exhibits?
Yeah, it appears to me that the left corner of my eye going down across, I don't know, this area right here from up here on my top of my eyelid down to this little corner there.
Now, Mr. Reeves, when you put the firearm on your lap, why did you do that?
Because you don't know who else is in the theater, you don't know who else is armed, and I didn't want to be I wasn't a threat to anybody else. I was only trying to defend myself. I didn't want anybody else to think that I was a threat.
Is that training? Does that come from training and years of training as a law enforcement officer?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay. And so you put that gun on your left knee?
I put it on my knee. I think it was my left knee.
After you put that gun on your left knee, did someone come and pick up that gun from your left knee?
Yes, sir. As I was adjusting my glasses and examining my face, I didn't see his badge, but a deputy walked up, and I heard him say that he was a deputy, and so when I leaned back, I pointed at my pistol. It was on my lap, so he picked it up.
Okay. Now, at that moment, were you able to look down at what was in between your feet?
As I put my glasses back on and the deputy was standing there, I looked down between my feet, and yes, I did. I saw the cell phone between my feet.
Madam Clerk? Yeah, I see that cell phone. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Mr. Reeves, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 24. I ask you to take a look at the interior of that exhibit and tell me if you recognize that exhibit.
Yes, sir, I think I do. The white spot up here, that kind of caught my eye. I think it was laying on the floor like that. But this is what it looks like, yes, sir.
Is that the phone that was located between your legs?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Reeves, you were arrested right there in seat number 9, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, by law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
And you were taken out in handcuffs to a vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you were interviewed.
Yes, sir.
And it's my understanding then you were interviewed by Detective Proctor and Detective Koenig, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The interview that you had with Detective Proctor and Detective Koenig were recorded, right?
Yes, sir.
And did you answer all of their questions?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did you encourage them to ask you any question that they needed to ask you there in that interview?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you waived your rights to remain silent
Yes, sir, I
that
did.
day, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you told them that you wanted to cooperate,
Yes, sir.
and did you?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment?
You may.
No further questions.
Thank you. Yes. Do you, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take a short comfort break. Let's take 10 minutes and remember my instructions during the recess, please.
All rise for the recess for 10 minutes.
Do you want me to just let them go? Tina, call them back just a second.
Oh, and jurors, can I see the jurors back in here?
Sorry.
So sorry. One week's notice.
Oh, okay.
Number 4 is in the.
Okay. We're gonna need to take an early lunch anyway, so rather than take a short break and then, go to lunch, I'm just gonna let you go. So we'll wait for number 4 though. But that's all. That way we won't have to call you back in and then go for another break. The lawyers and myself have some stuff to talk about. Any objection to?
Objection.
Okay. State, no objection to just telling number 4?
No objection.
Okay, yeah, you guys can go ahead. Remember my instructions during the recess. Be back at 12 o'clock.
They can't access the internet. What we'd like to do is, for jury deliberations, have them have the computer, that way they can watch the video.
Okay.
If the court needs a case, we'll have a case directly on point that I can bring back after the break.
Okay.
That permits that.
Your Honor, as long as the defense likewise would be able to put our contents on that computer, I would think that there would be no problem.
Absolutely.
Anything admitted into evidence will go back, and just off the top of my head, as long as it's a clean computer that can play, I can't imagine any reason why that wouldn't be the best way. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I know the state here understands we've had limitations in the past where we didn't have a computer that we could send back, so the process was always a little different. And it was very cumbersome, quite frankly, but it was what we had to do. We'd bring them back, let them watch, whoever had a computer that they could show, they'd watch, then they'd go back, they'd want to see it again, we'd have to do it all over again. No one could speak to them and they couldn't speak to us. just for the purpose of showing. So it was very cumbersome, and I've often wished that we just had one that could just go back there. So if there's any objections to that, I'll hear them now, but,
Judge, my only objection is that we want to make sure that whatever computer that they have are able to play the videos of both sides, obviously.
right.
Yeah, obviously you can use it.
Well, we've got to make sure that, we can download them. When I spoke to Glenn, he thought it was a dinosaur, so I don't know what the capabilities are.
It's a Windows 7 because that's what was existing at the time. So we wiped it. The codec that you need to play the raw videos and everything that we have is on there because Windows 10 just wouldn't
Okay,
accept it.
I
So
get
we
that.
had to go back to that. And then, of course, the Wi-Fi's been disabled. The Bluetooth has been disabled.
I don't have a problem with any of that.
And all that mechanical gut stuff.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that our stuff plays, so
All
I guess
right.
we'll have to.
Yeah,
maybe
check it out.
Go check it out.
I understand thoroughly. I've had a terrible time when we went to Windows 10. A lot of things didn't work all of a sudden, and so I get it. Just so long as both sides can equally utilize it and that it's not too difficult for the jury, as long as it's not too difficult for them to
It's
use.
set up with a tag, so they hit it, it goes right to the player. So
Okay.
there's no,
No other stuff?
there's,
Okay,
it is so clean, it's almost useless.
awesome.
Except for
That, okay. All right, you guys, during the lunch break, will have an opportunity to look at that? Well, we don't have to do it
Right,
now
right,
anyway, so.
Right. If we can do it after that.
Yeah, we can do it after that. All right,
And just for sake of argument, let's say that doesn't happen. Then I guess for the defense, we have to use the cumbersome process.
okay, yeah, well,
So let's not argue about it until we figure out. We
right,
got enough things to
but
do.
definitely before the end of the day, let's have that ironed out.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Enjoy your lunch break.